Welcome along to my Tactics and Tips series. This is a new series following on from my unit analysis videos, and before that my army list series. In my unit analysis videos I was looking at the unit's history, and then in the second part of the video how to use it in the game itself. In my army list series I was looking at army composition, and I looked at most armies for most periods, biblical, classical and Dark Ages, as well as most periods in medieval. And I was interested in looking at the kind of units that each army had and which ones to use and why. So if you're interested in army composition, check out those videos. Today I will focus on battlefield tactics and offer some tips on using different units in the game. We will look in particular at light foot in the classical period. But just to say that what I've got to say about all of these units in the classical period is pretty much relevant to these units in biblical and in Dark Ages, because often it's the same kind of units that we are using. I am a competent player, but I wouldn't say I'm an expert on using Lightfoot. However, I think I can provide a good overview for using skirmishers, as well as some useful tips, especially for new players. Plus, I've done a lot of number crunching and tested out different situations in order to examine the effectiveness of certain tactics and certain units. So, Lightfoot, here we are. We've got our little line. Here we've got javelin men. They're probably one of my favourite units of Lightfoot because they're cheap. I'm a little bit of a miser. I often take out the minimum really in terms of skirmishers, and I try and win with my heavy foot, infantry and cav. But I do like javelin men because they're only 24, great value, and they're 50 up against standard lights on impact like slingers and archers. So that's a real bonus. So I really do like these guys. Slingers are 27. They've actually gone up in price. When the game first came out they were 24, but it's not too bad because you do get that range of 2. So with javelin men, obviously you've got to be adjacent to the enemy. You can get charged. You've got that range there. You can be in the marsh, rough ground or whatever, firing away. So they are pretty good. Archers, not so keen on because yes, they have that range of 3, but you still get the penalty for long range fire. So really you want to be using them close up or from 2 squares. So really I'm not so keen on them at 30. You've got your superior quality skirmishers. If you're interested, I did a video on Balearic slingers actually, so you can look at that video to get all the details. But as an overview, with your superior quality skirmishers, you're roughly talking about 10% more casualties compared to your standard Lightfoot. Now that can be useful because it just means you're going to get more cohesion tests, which is what the game's all about. So yes, only 10%, but you do get quite a bit more chance to disrupt units, and that's especially so if you've only say got 2 units of Balearic slingers. Fair chance to disrupt something, whereas with your standard slingers you might need 3 units. So they can come in useful. Although Cretan archers at 39 now, that's a heck of a lot. So, and even these Balearic slingers, they've gone up in price. They used to be 33, now they're 36. So you are paying a fair bit for these. But if you've got some points over, then yeah, maybe invest. The Roman lights are pretty good. 30, but the Roman lists are so good anyway. I'm not going to say bring the price down. These Velites, what they're good at is the melee rounds. So they charge in, and then in the melee rounds they are 62 up against your standard Lightfoot. So that can be very handy indeed. They're kind of like super top javelin men, really. Okay, so now let's ask the question. How should you use Lightfoot in battles? I'm going to try and attempt to answer that. There are some variables, such as who you're fighting in the map, to take into consideration. However, there are some general principles and tips that I'm going to suggest. There are 2 errors commonly made by players. First is firing at multiple units in a kind of scattergun approach. This does little. Some casualties may occur, but what you really want in this game is a cohesion test. Focusing on one unit with multiple units of Lightfoot can often quickly lead to a cohesion test. So say this is my line of Lightfoot with my army behind. I might be firing away and not doing much. There might be some casualties, but no disruptions. Whereas if I focus, perhaps say these units fairly close, you could maybe not using these, but units that are close together, concentrating your fire on one enemy unit, highly likely I'm going to get a disruption. So don't waste your ammo and your firing and your missiles by just firing haphazardly. Just focus your fire. That's where you're going to get your disruptions. Secondly, and kind of on the opposite side of things, players can sometimes keep firing for long periods at a unit after it has passed a cohesion test. Now that's the key point though, after it's passed a cohesion test. Generally speaking, you should move on to a new target after it's passed its cohesion test, because it's just not going to disrupt. The way the game is designed, you fire away, there's a cohesion test, it's not going to disrupt again unless there are additional negative modifiers. And those negative modifiers might well be artillery. So if you're firing away, there's a cohesion test, then you can fire your art, and then you might well disrupt a unit. And also 75% combat strength. If you're trying to aim for that, that is another reason why you might get an additional -1 modifier. So that's the exception. Artillery or for the combat strength. Otherwise, if you're just firing away, especially in the beginning of a game, there's a cohesion test, then just move on. As well as focusing our fire, we should look at specific units to fire at. And we can move over. I've got a few over here. So, infantry, like citizen hoplites, they're very common. They're only protected, and they suffer heavy casualties from skirmish fire, which leads to more cohesion tests. So this is a great kind of unit to fire at. Massed archers as well. They are unprotected, and they're even more susceptible to large losses, and they will quickly disrupt. Also units like irregular foot, because they're lightly protected. Pikes as well, although with pikes they're a large unit, so it's harder maybe to get disruptions compared to the smaller units, but they are still protected, so a good target. These kind of units are great targets in general. Units that you might want to avoid are armoured units. So we've got the Romans and the veteran African spear. They are armoured. And basically, armour is not good for skirmish fire, and it's very difficult, especially if you're using your standard slingers, archers, javelin men. At the beginning of a battle, you're just not going to get any disruptions against armoured units. Casualties are going to be minimal, and so you're going to have to wait until the later stages of a battle when their strength is weakened, and then you've got a better chance of getting disruptions. One point of difference, actually, and I did test this out a little bit. In Ancients, the difference between protected, I had a little look at protected and some armour. Now, in Classical, we've got the Hastati as an example. and the difference is quite a lot. It's 25%, roughly 25% more casualties when you're firing at a protected unit compared to a unit like Hastati, which is just some armor. These are armored, but Hastati just some armor, but there's still quite a significant difference in casualties. Whereas in medieval, generally speaking, because there's more bowmen on the field, and those longbowmen are pretty strong, there's only about 7% difference between some armor and protected units. But in Ancients, you tend to find that basically, I suppose it's historically accurate, that armor's more effective against missile fire than it is in medieval. So just something to bear in mind. Cavalry is also a good target for your light foot. One of the weaknesses of cavalry is its propensity to disrupt after just a few volleys of fire from light foot. Smaller units than infantry, because usually is around 240 for cavalry unit compared to your standard kind of around 480. And so, just one round of fire on cavalry can be devastating. So cavalry is a good target. Elephants are also quite easy to disrupt. I did a video on elephants recently. If you want to check out that video, you can. But in summary, I found that with 3 units of skirmishers, it didn't really matter if it was javelin men or slingers or archers. It was all the same, actually, the results. About 50% of the time, with just one round of fire, I was getting a disruption on that elephant. So just from 3 units firing away, by the time I was firing my 3rd unit, is around about a 50% chance to disrupt the elephant. You've got to also bear in mind that elephants, when they rout, they cause cohesion tests for units for 2 squares all the way around, which is different from all other units in the game. Other units just adjacent friendly units get the CTs, but with the elephant, it's 2 squares all the way around. So they are a great unit to aim for. Also, their strength is low. It's only 20. So even with one volley of fire from javelin men or slingers, they can often get 2 casualties, and that's already 10% unit strength with just one volley of fire. So elephants are very susceptible to heavy losses against skirmishers. So these are the main units to concentrate on. Protected units, lightly protected, unprotected, avoid armor, go for cavalry, go for elephants. Rough ground. Right, this is a little funny little experiment. Sometimes players forget that Lightfoot can actually attack regular infantry in rough ground, and that can be great for just holding that unit in place. These units are quite expensive, 42. Javelin men are only 24. So you can hold this unit in place and cause casualties, and that might help you. Focus your units elsewhere while you're holding something like this on rough ground with just skirmishers. And we can just have a quick look now. So if we charge in, look at that, 37% chance to win. What happens? I've disrupted that unit. Can you believe it? I don't get an automatic cohesion drop because it's only Lightfoot, but he'll probably win in the next round. But let's see if we can do it. And what's it with your regular? Okay, javelin men are better on impact. It's only 4% chance to win, but let's just see what happens. That's not bad. There we are. So we can hold them in place for a little bit, and we've disrupted a heavy foot unit. It's pretty neat. Let's Just something to bear in mind. Sometimes people forget about that. Evasions. I did some tests and I have some figures to throw at you. Javelin men. So when javelin men charge into slingers archers, what's the chance of an evasion? And in my test I found that it was about 68% of the time. So these units will evade about 68% of the time. Good chance for an evasion. And around 12% of the time they were getting caught and rear charged and often fragmented. So those were the figures for charging. With the Roman lights, I did a little test against javelin men as an example, and 30% of the time the javelin men were evading. Most of the time they were standing and fighting, just to tell you. So those are the kind of figures. In conclusion, try to focus on protected, lightly protected, unprotected troops, cavalry and elephants. That's where you'll get a lot of joy with your skirmishers. Remember to try to get your javelin men charging into these units, because even if they evade, you're clearing the ground. You know, sometimes Lightfoot, it can kind of clog you up a little bit and they can just waste a few turns. But if you want to clear ground, you can charge your javelin men in to these units, and there's a good chance that they'll evade and that will clear some space, which might be useful for you. Lightfoot is more effective against pike and hoplite armies, less so against Roman and Carthaginians, because with the Romans they've got more troops with more armour. The Carthaginians don't have quite as many units with full armour, but what the Carthaginian armies do have is quite a lot of light horse, and light horse is an effective counter against Lightfoot. So really, against the Romans and Carthaginians, your Lightfoot might not be as effective as against all the Greek armies, early Greek armies, and your standard classical armies like Macedonian and Lysimachid and so on. Okay, so that's about it. Just some tips there. If you've got anything to add, anything that I left out, please leave your comments below. Like the video if you like it, and subscribe if you want to. That's all for now. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you again soon.